Good morning, everyone. This is becoming a pattern for the Conservative Party of Canada. CTV News, Northern Ontario, is reporting, quote, Conservative Party overturns Nipissing Temiskaming candidate. Oh, I listened to it. I tried. Okay. North Bay veteran City Councilor Mark King is crying foul, saying he's being turfed by the federal Conservative Party. This comes even though he won the local nomination to run in the federal election this fall in the Nipissing Temiskaming riding. I added riding. Now, King is speaking out, saying democracy has been overruled. Quote, we've been beaten up by this process. Mark King is out as the Conservative Party candidate for the October federal election, and to say he's not happy would be an understatement. This has been extremely hard for me to swallow, said King. He says he was vetted by the Tories 2 months ago during the nomination process after winning, but after winning, he was later told he couldn't be the candidate. King says it's over an accusation that he used a corporate credit card to buy a party membership. Quote, we've turned over every possible rock and we could possibly turn over. I want to make it perfectly clear. I did not purchase my membership with a corporate card, said King. King believes an appeal was made at the local level to the National Conservative Selection Committee, which overturned his nomination win. He is now accusing members of the Conservative Party of bias, saying the party favors the other candidate, Geordie Carr, whom King beat last month in a vote. This is not democracy. There is no question. It appears to be a couple of people who have overruled democracy inside the party, said King. When asked for comment, Corey Hahn, a representative for the party's head office in Ottawa, party had this to say in a statement. And this is, read this statement and listen to how well crafted this is. This PR is top notch. Top notch. Here it is. Quote, in the rare case of a nominee may be disqualified, it is never a decision the party takes lightly. As a result, the other candidate in the nomination was made our Conservative candidate for the October election, and we're pleased to have Geordie Carr on our team. Per our standard practice, reasons for disallowing an applicant are not provided. So they don't mention the victim here, the person that they disallowed, and they say, we're not talking about the reasons, and they get the name of the new candidate in there, right? So it's, man, like it hits a lot of PR buttons, right? And again, this whole in a rare case, like this isn't a rare case anymore, guys. This is happening a lot. I turned up like 5 or 6 news articles, but I'm going to show you one more after this and then move on. But it's interesting to pay attention to. Is this the Conservative Party you want in charge? King says he's been in contact with other parties within the district that are currently looking for federal candidates. I wonder which other parties do you think? Do you think he's going to run for the NDP? Or maybe the Liberals? Anyway, as for Geordie Carr, she says she wishes Mark King the best and that she's excited to begin to campaign. I find it interesting that they didn't name the other party, right? Like that's interesting. It's obviously the People's Party of Canada. And I don't have any insider information on that. I'm not trying to make news on that. I'm just saying, as a Conservative, what other party is there really that you could be looking at? I mean, I suppose there's a couple other ones, but probably. Anyway, if the People's Party doesn't have a candidate in that riding, I would imagine that Mr. King would be looking at it. Not to say anything. I don't know, but I would just speculating. Okay, Post-Millennials reporting, quote, the Conservatives made a big mistake by disqualifying Salim Mansur as a candidate. I'm not going to go through this. This happened a while ago. This happened last month. But this is a big deal. And again, it's not so rare, is it? Right? Not so rare. So now I want to look at this because this is interesting. The carbon tax has been popping up and being chatted about a lot in Twitter, on Facebook, and other platforms, in real life as well. People are talking about a carbon tax. And fundamentally, I've been talking about this for a while. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Here's a Financial Post piece that talks about the cost of the carbon tax to people who have been living under it for a decade, since 2008, and it hasn't reduced emissions. And the other part of this is there have been recent studies, corroborated scientific studies that say that greenhouse gases, man-made emissions, don't cause climate change. And I'm not saying whether the studies are correct or incorrect. I am not a scientist, but I am saying that this idea that 99% of scientists agree, or 97%, or whichever number that you want to choose, looks to be very false. And I know that there's been debunking of the 97%. There's lots of articles talking about that. But there seems to be more papers coming out recently talking about this. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But right now I want to talk about the carbon tax and how it doesn't reduce emissions and is very expensive. Financial Post is reporting in their opinion section, quote, BC tricked Canadian politicians into believing its carbon tax policy works. it doesn't. It says revenue neutral carbon tax is an accounting exercise for BC families. It's an expensive reality. While Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government gets set to force a federal carbon tax on all of Canada's provinces and territories, taxpayers across the country deserve to know what happened in the country's carbon tax test case, British Columbia. The Trojan horse of the carbon tax was wheeled into the BC public square in 2008 with the government's promise that it would somehow cost average people nothing and would be revenue neutral. But that turned out to be a cautionary tale for the ages. For years, the carbon tax cheerleaders continued to laud the fee that's been tacked on to carbon-emitting goods and services, urging the rest of the country to follow suit. It was touted as a magical formula that would somehow protect the environment and lower taxes all at once. Visions of hydrogen-powered buses, and solar cars danced in the heads of green bean counters. Revenue neutral, they sang. I scroll down a little bit. The reality of government, however, is always duller and griftier than that. The current BC government has dropped the term revenue neutral altogether and now calls the carbon tax a tool. Before the charade was abandoned entirely, this is what revenue neutral meant for the BC carbon tax. In the 2016-17 provincial government raked in $1.2 billion in the carbon tax from taxpayers. This amount is listed on page 68 in the budget document and as a frame titled Revenue Neutral Carbon Tax Plan. Then the government scraped together 17 sundry tax credits and stuffed them into the carbon tax frame, making the tax sum balance out to zero. Abracadabra, revenue neutral. That's all it meant. And we're going to get to another situation just like this, except with corn. For real. But I wanted to show you. Here's the budget. Here it is. The link is in the description for the BC 2016-2017 federal budget. Provincial budget, not federal. Here's the carbon tax report and plan. It says revenue neutral carbon tax report. And here it says carbon tax revenue. Right? There you go. How many millions at 1 point? There you go. Okay. Right? It's okay. There you go. Revenue neutral. Shebang. And how did they achieve it? Well, here are the reduction in provincial revenues due to designated measures: the personal tax income, the low income climate action tax credit of $115.50 per adult, the reduction of 5% in the first two personal income tax rates, northern and rural homeowners benefit $200, BC seniors home renovation tax credit, child fitness credit and children's arts credit, small business venture capital tax credit, budget increase, training tax credit extended individuals. What does training tax credit individuals have to do with climate, I wonder? Or the children's fitness and children's arts tax. That's very climate oriented. Maybe they're recycling or repurposing things? Is that what's going on? You want to look through the business ones too? Okay, we will. General corporate income tax rate reduced from 12 to 11%. Oh, okay, so that's definitely climate and carbon related for sure. Reducing the business tax rate from 12% to 11%. That works, yeah. Small business corporate income tax reduced from 4.5 to 3.5. That's for sure 100% about the environment and carbon. Corporate income tax small business threshold increased from 400,000 to 500,000. Yeah, certainly has to do with carbon. Industrial property tax credit of 60% of school property taxes payable by major industry. School property taxes reduced by 50% for lands classified as farm. Oh, so if you have a farm, you have to pay 50% of the school taxes? Don't they use buses a lot? Interactive digital media tax credit, training tax credit extended business, scientific research and experimental development tax extended in 2014, and film incentive BC tax credit extended in 2009 and enhanced in 2010. Quick, we don't have one. What else can we use? Use the film credit. That's totally environmental. Yeah, all those trucks and stuff, totally environmental. All those film stars flying in and out, sure. You know what? Add Justin Trudeau's vacations to this one too, right? That's a carbon neutral thing to add. What ridiculous! This is from their budget. What an absolute farce. What a ridiculous. Oh my goodness. Okay. Right? Yeah, that's all it meant. We're going to abracadabra, it's zero. Ha ha, carbon tax. Revenue neutral, sure. Back to the article. It was a crass puppet show. Every provincial and federal budget includes tax credits for things like home renovations, children fitness programs, film incentives, and business training tax credits. In BC, however, there's an uncommon carbon tax taken from people. So these very common credits were just repackaged to make the tax appear neutral on paper, as a senior BC government official admitted during last year's budget lockup. This was always just an accounting exercise. The carbon tax is not an accounting exercise for BC families. It is an expensive reality for any Canadian subject to it. Under the federal formula, $35 per ton, the carbon tax costs a lot of money. At the gas station, approximately 8.55 cents per liter of gasoline, with the GST tacked onto it, and 10.06 per liter for diesel with the GST. To fill up an average Toyota Camry with a 70-liter fuel tank costs $6 in carbon tax. A Dodge Ram pickup truck costs more than $10 in carbon tax, and a Ford Super Duty diesel costs more than $17 per fill-up. For tractor-trailer trucks, it costs $45 in carbon taxes to fill it up, just one of those cylinder tanks with diesel. Canadians bought more than 40 billion liters of gasoline and more than 16 billion liters of diesel fuel in 2016. Multiply that volume by the carbon tax per liter, and the government haul is crystal clear. It gets worse, though, because even with the carbon tax costing Canadians billions of dollars, it's still not reducing emissions. According to environmentalists leading the carbon tax charge, in January, the Sierra Club reported on the BC experiment emissions were higher in 2015 than in 2010 and have risen in 4 of the last 5 years. BC's latest emission data mark years of failure to reduce emissions by more than a token amount. If taking billions of dollars away from Canadians doesn't reduce emissions, then what is the point of this forced carbon tax? And that's what I've been asking for a while. Back to the article. When the forced federal carbon tax is set at $50 per ton in 2022, that means that gasoline will have a carbon tax of $11.63 per liter. Will that be enough? Not according to the Environment Canada bureaucrats who told Environment Minister Catherine McKenna that the country needed a carbon tax of $100 per ton by 2020 and a tax of $300 per ton by 2050 to meet the government's promise under the Paris Climate Agreement. That would be 23 cents per liter on gas in 2020 and then 70 cents per liter by 2050 and about 50 extra in today's money to fill up the family sedan. People need to use oil and gas. The carbon tax doesn't make people reduce their use of this modern lifeblood. It just costs them a lot of money, and while not stopping the emissions. Our economy and our modern way of life depend on oil and gas. We use them to run our power stations, till our soil, plant our food, mine our minerals, mill our wood, heat our greenhouses, manufacture all of our goods, and haul those goods and food to market. We use oil and gas products to travel to school, work, and the beach. Planes, automobiles, and transit buses all use oil and gas, and they were manufactured and shipped to us using oil and gas. All of these actions of everyday life depend on the miracle of hydrocarbons. So the carbon tax is a tax on everything. Carbon taxes don't just make gasoline more expensive, they make life much more expensive. That was well done. I thought it was worth a full read, and link is in the description. This is true. This is true. We have all these tax credits in Ontario, and it is frustrating to be looking at this and saying it doesn't work. And thankfully, here's the Premier of BC, Mr. Horgan, who says that the premiers, he couldn't convince them. And the video is not going to play, it looks like, so it's not going to be played, so I'm not going to play it. And we're going to move on to the next thing. Here's RT. And if you don't know what RT is, I believe they're a Russian news, like a state media, just like CBC, right? So a lot of people don't like this as a source. So I'm just going to use this as a jumping off point, but I wanted to show you that I looked for articles using Canadian media or any American or Western media talking about this article specifically, this new study that's been released and then corroborated. And regardless, I'm not a scientist, but I just want to point this out. Again, for the scientific, everybody agrees, right? Apparently they don't agree. There's lots of people who don't agree, but the news isn't writing articles on it, but the Russian newspapers are. So we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at the original source. All the links are in the description. RT reporting, quote, Finnish study finds practically no evidence for man-made climate change. I'm just going to read up to in a paper here, okay? A new study conducted by a Finnish research team has found little evidence to support the idea of man-made climate change. The results of the study were soon corroborated by researchers in Japan. So people who are saying this is not peer-reviewed, it is peer-reviewed and corroborated according to this. In a paper published last month entitled No Experimental Evidence for the Significance Anthropomorphic Climate Change, and that just means human-caused, anthropogenic climate change. That just means human-caused. A team of scientists at Turku University in Finland determined that current climate models fail to take into account the effects of cloud coverage on global temperatures, causing them to overestimate the impact of human-generated greenhouse gases. Okay, and I'm going to read the abstract here. Here's the paper. Link is in the description. As I've said, it says no experimental evidence for the significant anthropogenic, sorry about that before, climate change. Abstract. In this paper, we will prove that the GCM models used in IPCC report AR5 fail to calculate the influences of the low cloud cover changes on the global temperature. That is why those models give a very small natural temperature change, leaving a very large change for the contribution of the greenhouse gases in the observed temperature. This is the reason why IPCC has to use a very large sensitivity to compensate a too small natural component. Further, they have to leave out the strong negative feedback due to the clouds in order to magnify the sensitivity. In addition, this paper proves that the changes in the low cloud cover fractions practically control the global temperature. Okay, and I'm not a scientist. I was playing with the idea of reading this whole thing out, but it's very, well, it's long enough that not for this video, but separately. But anyway, if there's interest in that, I'll get into that. I'm not going to explain it fully because, honestly, I'm not a scientist. And looking at all of this, I'm not sure, right? I don't know. But the conclusions seem very clear, and being corroborated by a second team in Japan seems like 99% of scientists don't agree. And that's all I'm trying to say with this, which leads me to believe that maybe science doesn't know everything. Maybe the science isn't settled. Right? Maybe there's still questions to talk about, solutions to find. Moving on, here's Andrew Scheer, and still within the climate change realm, but I want to point this out. This is the corn I was talking about earlier. Andrew Scheer just gutted his own climate change plan via Globe and Mail, and so we're going to read the Globe article, and it says, Andrew Scheer just gutted his own climate change plan. When Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer released his greenhouse gas reduction plan last month, it was rightly criticized as thin and vague. As of this week, it's a whole lot thinner. On July 8th, Mr. Scheer sent Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a letter accusing the Liberal leader of imposing a secret fuel tax. As every Canadian by now knows, the centerpiece of the Conservative election platform is opposition to the federal carbon tax, or any carbon tax anywhere, ever, in this galaxy or any other. But Mr. Scheer's letter wasn't about that. Instead, he attacked future plans for fuel standards of a type Canada has long had. Beginning in 2022, Canadian refiners will have to create gasoline that is 10 to 12% less carbon intensive, which in plain English means 10 to 12% less polluting for each kilometer driven. Mr. Scheer claimed these regulations will eventually cost Canadian drivers 4 cents a litre. If elected, he pledged to scrap them, all of which clarifies the Conservative environmental platform and reveals it to be a seriously unserious plan. Okay, so what they're talking about here is the fuel standards, and the fuel standards state that they have to use biomass like corn, ethanol, or sugarcane to produce 10 to 12% of the gasoline. And that is supposed to bring down emissions. How does that bring down emissions? Well, it doesn't make it cleaner burning. Not at all, zero. It in fact makes it less efficient. It evaporates more, which is bad. But the reason that it is viewed as being having less emissions is because it comes from biomass. It's grown. Here's a link is in the description. This is the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And they say producing and burning ethanol, for example, results in emissions of carbon dioxide, CO2, a greenhouse gas. However, the combustion of ethanol made from biomass, such as corn and sugarcane, is considered atmospheric carbon neutral because as the biomass grows, it absorbs CO2, which may offset CO2 produced when the ethanol is burned. Some ethanol producers burn coal and natural gas for heat sources in the fermentation process to make fuel ethanol, while some burn corn stalks or sugarcane stalks. So I find it interesting that it's all a trick of the light. It's fake. I mean, it being your car is still going to emit the same amount of CO2 that it would emit if you filled it up with regular gasoline instead of the ethanol hybrid that we've got going on now. And the only reason they're saying there's an emission reduction is because the biomass grows above ground, so they're saying it pulls that out of the air. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but I think it's false to imply that there's a reduction here because there's not really. It's a trick of the light. It's the same kind of accounting as stuffing all of these budgetary items into this, right? Like those CO2 that comes from oil originated in the earth, and same with the CO2 growing up from the ground. It originated from the earth, and the whole cycle. The earth is a cycle. It's built to absorb and recycle. itself, all of it. And the trick of the light is it's false, right? Like it's a false comparison. And the Globe and Mail simplifying it down to like, oh, Mr. Scheer's against this 10 to 12% reduction really leaves a lot of information out, right? Really is important, or doesn't discuss the mechanism by which they're calculating the 10 to 12%, and doesn't discuss anything other than politicizing it. So that's interesting to note, right? So I'm not claiming to have answers. I'm not claiming to know exactly what's going on, but it certainly looks like there's a lot of people who are pointing out really big flaws with carbon taxes in that they don't reduce emissions. And the mechanism itself is flawed because it just increases the price of everything and doesn't actually solve the problem, which is what I've been talking about for a long time. My video is longer than usual. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful day. If you haven't got your tickets yet for the Maxime Bernier conversation in Guelph, please do. Link is in the description. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.